I have a question about the agenda. So 2 meetings ago, we had some open-ended questions that we were going to receive some feedback on at the last meeting, which of course the people who had the answers showed up, but the people who had the questions did not. So I don't know if we can circle back on.
And I think Stacy,
or if they'll be
I think it was about 720.
yeah.
Okay, so it'll be incorporated.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
cool.
Stacy incorporated a lot of that
Okay,
feedback, and actually it's posted online, the answer.
Okay. All right.
Fun. Okay, are we starting? Hello, Steve. We have a quorum, so you can participate.
Woohoo!
Okay, we are recording. Okay, so welcome to the April 24th Joint Facilities Advisory Commission meeting. We are holding a hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per JFAC's electronic meeting policy. JFAC members are participating both here in person and virtually through electronic means. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will be run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the JFAC website. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option to wish to use it. For commissioners who are joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to other devices around you to minimize interference. For virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I will address when it is appropriate to turn it on in a moment. Microsoft Teams meeting chat should only be used for participants who need technical assistance and for members of the public to request to speak during the public comment period. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public comment period. If commissioners participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn on your video feed and raise the virtual hand in Teams. The video feeds are monitored that are on as an indicator of who would like to speak. I don't think we have any commissioners joining by phone, correct? Additional notes for our members of the public who would like to provide feedback and comment. We will hold public comment periods at the beginning and the end of the meeting. Those requesting to speak may do so during only one comment period and will be allotted up to 3 minutes to speak on tonight's agenda item. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has concluded. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay, so we have a couple of people joining virtually. We have Bill, Steve, and Robert here virtual. Welcome everyone. We have a great quorum this evening. I will just, last month we had a little hiccup, and it sort of all fell apart in the afternoon before the meeting. So, which is why I just sent out the clarifying email again, just because we can't, and we can only have at this point. I think that the rules may have changed but I know that there was a bill to try to get at least the public meetings to have 50%. You could have 50% of them instead of just, but I don't know that for sure. I don't know if that's been signed. Or if that was one of the many that got vetoed.
Be pleasantly surprised.
So, but anyway, please try to come, this evening is just discussion. We're not voting. But if we don't have a quorum, we can't conduct regular business. We can't take a vote. We can't kind of give feedback based on a non-quorum. So, other than that, a lot of times I will have a chair update. There really isn't that much. I think that I was invited to a chair's advisory commission chairs meeting on Arlington 2050, but that's next week. Give a little bit of update on what's going on with that. But on how the advisory commissions will participate in that. But all I have right now is a date next Tuesday night. Wells, do you have any updates?
Yeah, so this is, sort of in JFAC's lane and maybe not one sense, but another sense. And that is the kind of ongoing reporting that you might have seen on Arl Now and elsewhere about the Career Center construction contracts being bid out without prevailing wage provisions. Now, the backstory here, in case you hadn't read the stories, is that the county board a few years ago adopted on the county side a resolution that called for all construction contracts over, I believe, $250,000 to include, consistent with the practice in the federal sector, prevailing wage provisions that require for contractors to kind of pay their workers consistent with the kind of prevailing market wages in the private sector in the area. And this has caused some controversy recently because APS, when bidding out the Career Center contracts, did not include these provisions and has not adopted a resolution to include them in the future. So, this is on the one hand like a sort of labor issue, which isn't ordinarily what we might consider under the umbrella of facilities, but in another sense, it's about building, especially building buildings, and B, it is also about coordination between the county and the schools. And this seems like an area of concern because it notes a misalignment and policy between the county on the one side, which does have these provisions, and the school system on the other, which does not. And
Also
so
the entire delegation.
that was the latest update, exactly. So
Sorry, what'd you say? The entire state delegation also is concerned and expressed in
Mhm.
harsh terms in a letter, which is unusual, or, that doesn't happen every day.
yes,
So yes, but this is a big deal.
yeah, so 5 of our General Assembly delegation members wrote to the school board chair and vice chair in, I believe, late last month, just a few weeks ago, to say we are concerned that this contract with the Career Center is being bid out without prevailing wage provisions. So I wanted to at least flag it for your attention. I'm happy to kind of get your thoughts and feedback, but it's an area where Stacy and I have talked about potentially doing some work in the space.
Do we know that the negative is occurring, that they're not paying prevailing wage? Or is it, do we just don't have any visibility?
Well, go ahead.
I don't. So when I read that article, the first question was like, sure, you definitely should require it, or, I mean, it should be required. But what are they? What are the contracts?
We don't know because it hasn't come back yet.
Right,
So
so-
bids haven't come
At
in.
least one of the bids have come in, at least one of the bidders has been accused of wage theft.
But if it's not in there, they don't have to say anything, right? They just say $2.5 million, we'll get X, Y, and Z done. And then another comes in and says, okay, we'll do it for 3.5. Well, the 2.5 million, but the 2.5 million, when you sign a contract, if you don't have it in there, you
100%,
can't
yeah.
force it on.
I didn't know if it was something that we had written in the proposal, like, what are you gonna pay?
No, they would have to go back to the RFQ and issue
Yeah.
Q if they wanted to.
Seems like a-
Yeah, prevailing wage goes down. It's a kind of as I understand it, it's a condition in the RFP. So you have to be a prevailing wage contractor
The next
in
question,
order to bid. And
if it's already gone out, what can we do now?
So, but
Well-
what you're saying is you'd have to go back, they have to redo that.
They
Right.
are gonna make the decision next week, whether they're going to
Oh, right.
proceed with what they have
Right, so
already done, or whether they are going to go back.
Got it.
yeah, so the state delegation asked them to reissue
100%, yeah.
to reissue an RFP. Yeah, so there is an agenda item on the school board tomorrow night on the bid that did come in. And there's a presentation on the agenda. Okay, Steve has his hand up.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, this is one of my proverbial dumb questions, but has the school board stated a rationale for not, including the prevailing wage standard, or have they simply been silent on this issue?
I have not seen a public statement from the school board.
But either.
So just based on what you said, Wells, it sounds like that could be a possible intervention if JFAC chose to do it, to basically just say, we'd like some help in understanding why this would not be done in effect. I understand they're not bound by the county board's resolution, but unless there's some business reason for not doing it, which I find a little bit troubling.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
it just lower costs?
Well,
But I mean,
If they're paying minimum wage, it's not an issue. It's not a legal thing. It's simply the expectation of paying prevailing wage.
Yeah, I thought the ARL now article stated something to the effect that it's not gonna make a huge difference in the cost. Was to be prevailing wages. I don't know.
and further, it is kind of a quality indicator, which I think was already mentioned, that, gee, if it's a contractor that's not paying prevailing wages, that might imply that there could be other issues as well, which is a business problem. Okay, does that mean possibly shoddier work, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't want to
Just
discuss
saying.
permits. I do think it's worth, considering, what we might do, but just by way of asking questions for clarification. But I do want to note that just, based on my own experience in this area, that there are a lot of academic studies, a lot of research on this topic of the relationship between prevailing wage requirements on the one hand and bids and costs on the other. And the kind of consensus out of that giant pile of research seems to be that while there can be differences in the upfront bids between, prevailing wage and non-prevailing wage bids, that the actual costs, there's no difference. And there are a number of reasons for that, but it gets back to, Steve, the sort of indicators of quality. That's, yes, you might be paying the workers more, but they do a better job on a faster timeline, fewer mistakes that require, back end work.
Projects are delivered more on schedule is what I understand the main benefit to be, which is incredibly important for schools, because if you have a project slip 3 months, that's not nothing. You've got a school year. Is there any reason not to maybe say something today? Because we have a quorum and they're going to make the decision tomorrow.
Tomorrow
It's
is
an
an
information.
information item.
Okay, but they're not,
Next week.
Something for the next meeting.
they're gonna make a decision before we meet again. And really, they're already making the decision.
I mean, we could send a letter.
Or just a statement. It sounds
Yeah.
like there's some consensus. I mean, we.
Yeah.
I think we all support it.
But.
Yeah.
Of reissuing to correct this and to add it explicitly. All right, then
Yeah.
I guess I'll make a motion to vote on a statement to be sent out ASAP. It can be a short
Oh,
statement.
yes, yeah. Absolutely.
In support of,
And it would be that
Right.
in recognition, I'll try to have something, maybe in recognition of benefit, prevailing wage, stipulations, leading to on-time project delivery.
I think that's a leap to say.
Yeah, I mean,
Because you can find statistics that say that's not.
right.
I guess I've looked into this and I thought that was actually kind of to the bulk of the research is
We can
that
keep
it's
benefits general. We don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
well-
we could also just point out that the county board did in 2021 adopt a prevailing wage provision so that
Yeah.
any projects above $250,000 would
Yeah.
would include
in
a prevailing
consideration
wage
of this.
provision.
Okay.
And we can just say as a joint facilities advisory committee that we support, you know,
And-
on the merits that the county adopted it. Also, you know, also
Yeah.
adopt a provision and reissue an RFP for this project.
Do we know if it's an RFP or RFQ? I know that there's, I don't know which one. Maybe we can just reflect whatever.
Say it's an RFP.
Because the board docs,
Okay.
presentation's already loaded.
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Okay,
You see
okay.
what we want.
all right.
Steve,
Have
you're
what you
muted.
need?
As a former contracting officer, you could use solicitation as a generic term, so you don't have to say RFP or RFQ if we're not sure. It
Okay.
was a solicitation.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, well, that was part of our welcome.
Good
Do
stuff.
we need to take a vote?
Oh, yeah. Does anyone want to,
I'll
So I-
second.
all in favor of JFAC making a statement?
Not objecting. just-
I
So I'll catch up later.
Any opposed? Okay,
Get stuff done.
all right, public comment. Do you have any guests here that would like to give a public comment? Now, you can also call at the end of the meeting. Okay, seeing none, we will move on. So,
Just for the record, what is the vote tally is 701?
One abstain,
yes,
abstention.
That's good. Sorry.
okay. Okay, so the next item of discussion, this is on the proposed school capacity review, and this is in the pre-CIP report and pre-K and APS enrollment projections. And these are kind of mixed in. Why don't we start with the pre-K and enrollment projections? We can move to the proposed school capacity review, because I think they're related, but I think that but the pre-K and the enrollment projections also questions came from that in the last meeting. So let's, I mean, this was one of the things that we talked about in the last meeting, was that the number for pre-K and projections, let's see, paper here. Could we pull up the, or show the pre-K enrollment report?
Page 31, is that what we're doing?
The one from page 7, the chart that shows this one. And I'll also note that updated capacity and utilization tables are now available. And so that has the new enrollment projections in a capacity view. And there was a link to that on our agenda.
I didn't know it was new.
What?
I didn't know that was new. I knew all the rest. It looked like it was all the same stuff from before.
Yeah, that's been an update, because I
So
just
send
looked
it.
in the.
I just didn't look at it.
PPIQ report, it's now updated.
Yeah.
Did these capacity utilization tables, did they reflect? Not, but.
I mean, like neighborhood transfers.
Well, my understanding is that there's probably 200 kids going from Wakefield to WL and
Yeah.
probably 200 going from Wakefield to Yorktown. I mean, it was a huge
Yeah.
voluntary transfer this year.
It's
Maybe
happening-
not 200, that's
Yes.
not. Yeah,
That's been happening
okay,
a couple of years.
so,
Yeah,
d-
it's
but
not-
did these, okay, so did these show that expected transfer?
only for the spring update. So, if Emily can pull it up, I can. That capacity utilization.
Okay. Maybe we can just.
I know,
caveat-
or whatever.
No, we can just caveat the high school that there's a lot of transfers that may
Okay.
rebalance it.
Yeah.
And that's part of another document called the enrollment manifest. That's spelled out there.
Has that been updated or is that?
Yeah, it was published in March. It's public information. It's on the APS website.
That's part of the pre-CIP report.
No.
Okay.
So there's,
Okay.
so APS manages enrollment in different ways. There's
Right.
CIPs of capital projects, and then there's something called the enrollment.
Yeah.
And those are short-term
Yeah.
tools to manage enrollment.
Okay.
So
I
that's,
saw the list of tools, but I didn't know that we showed the impact of applying. But we do.
because for budget and staffing purposes, that has to be something that is
Yeah.
factored into the planning.
Okay. Is the proposed school capacity review part of that?
No,
Okay.
that's separate work.
Okay, okay. Okay, so let's talk about the pre-K enrollment numbers and projections, and maybe go to some of the questions that we asked last time and just kind of get through those. So if you notice, in this chart down at the very bottom, there are very little numbers.
That's the
You know, on
pre-K.
the brown bars or gray are the numbers of the actual number of pre-K students that were received that in that September. Are those September numbers or? September 30.
So anything
Yeah.
underneath the gray bars are actuals, anything in that orange at the bottom of below the blue bars, those are what the Office of Academics had budgeted for pre-K as of that point in time.
Okay. And, you know, in the last meeting, we noted that, you know, there is a roughly, you know, I understand too, in the enrollment projections report, that 919 number actually increased. You know, but because one of the things about pre-K is that we get students and, you know, one of the things about September 30 numbers is that they change in the next 6 months. And one of the things about pre-K that I've always understood about pre-K is that even when we were facing, you know, big enrollment crunches and then, you know, sort of overcapacity of enrollment, APS still wanted to leave, you know, planned to leave a certain amount of pre-K seats open because a lot of our pre-K students are special needs and they get identified mid-year through early intervention and they want to have a spot for them and they want to have staffing for these kids because it's really hard to get a special education pre-K student, you know, pre-K teacher mid-year. So, so it's inflated to a certain degree.
They
And
want to have a buffer.
right, they want to have a buffer and I support that buffer for all of those reasons. But I think for capacity, you know, when we're talking about our facilities and our capacity utilization, I think I just want to make sure that number is as accurate as possible and that it's reflecting, you know, real, you know, it's not altering our projections in a way that makes planning more difficult or, you know, that makes that where you misread planning or that we're not utilizing our facilities, our existing facilities in an optimal way. So, this is not to question, the projections or how they're using, I just want to make sure this number makes sense. And, the 1,235 number is a number that has been unchanged since as long as I was.
And if you look in the past, you can imagine that all, the buffer that was filled is reflected on those prior numbers, right?
Right.
Those are not September 30th. Those were, whoever ended up going. And none of them get close even, really. They're all 100 less than where the buffer is.
Right.
Where the projected
Right.
number is.
But in recent years, like last year, and if you look at the capacity utilization chart, at the elementary school level, which is where pre-K impacts, relative to stated design capacity to actual capacity, to actual students enrolled, the number for this year is is a surplus of 1,400, the biggest number. And it's because, and I imagine it's because it's reflecting the actual utilization of not having those 300, or, because it's reflecting the actual pre-K numbers as opposed to this projected 1,200.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, is it possible to, which is why I wanted to look at this proposed school capacity review. And this is in the pre-CIP report. So, but what staff had proposed to do is to look at how our schools are actually used. So in, what they, as it is right now, that when you look at the capacity utilization chart, there's, a school is given a certain capacity, and then enrollment, current enrollment and then projected enrollment is compared to that. That stated design capacity is the capacity of that school when it was built. So say, I'll just use the example of Nottingham because Charles and I were talking earlier, and I said, say the stated capacity of Nottingham, or the design capacity of Nottingham is 500 students. But there's only 400 and, but that was the design capacity. What is this? What is the, let's just use the real number, Robert. What is the design capacity of Nottingham?
Nottingham, so their capacity is 513.
That's good.
They have 5 relocated. But their actual school population at the beginning of the school year was 375. So it's only 73%.
Okay. But the 513 number is a number that they were given when it was built, and the 513 number does not include relocables. Is that correct?
Well, according to page 31 of the SIP, it says it's a separate number. It says building capacity with relocatables is another number.
Yeah.
So 513 is.
513 is just like the capacity in the building.
Right.
But just for reference, just
Okay.
for background, it has 5 relocatables.
Okay.
Beyond
Okay.
that.
Okay. It has 5 relocatables.
So there are
So what is-
capacities actually, so what does that mean? That's more than obviously.
It is.
518, so what is there, 513, whatever it was, more?
I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
So do you have a number for that?
No,
Yeah.
I don't, not
Yeah.
right now, but
So
Yeah. So
Oh, no.
So what this does, but, okay, let me just let's get back to this here. So that was the design, but in the years, let's use my Long Branch, for example. What's the design capacity of Long Branch? It's like 493.
Branch, right now it's, the Long Branch is 533.
530.
Design capacity.
Okay, so the design capacity of Long Branch is 532.
Or 20 at the beginning of this.
There are 2 relocatables, right?
No, 4.
4 of the relocatables.
So
Okay.
30.
So, but during, but that design capacity was built on, a certain number of classroom, size, how many classrooms could fit. There was also a computer lab built in that maybe was, so what this code that has possibly changed, maybe there's a classroom now in the computer lab. There isn't at Long Branch, as far as I know, because it didn't have any windows and they didn't want to put any, but design, so a better example is like a design capacity of our high schools they were built at 1800, but during the big enrollment crunch, we added 300 seats by using like these internal modifications. And instead of using a 5-7 model, we used a 7-7 model, and they did some internal modifications, adding 300 more design seats. So, do you have a question?
Whenever you're done, sorry.
No.
Well, yeah, sorry.
And so what this proposed design capacity review is suggesting is that let's go in and examine what that design capacity is. Is it really still 533?
But they know it's not.
They know it's not.
They know it's not for a number of reasons, including education has changed.
Right. Yeah.
So some examples of this are the efforts to include more special education students in the classrooms, which means there are 2 teachers in a classroom, which may mean you would need 2 desks,
Right.
which may mean 2 teachers can handle 30 students better than 1 teacher handles 25. And so do you need a larger classroom? And there's other, it's not planning factors, but it's the other ed specs, sorry. It's the ed specs have changed. We know for a fact that the way APS intends to use its space has changed, but the buildings haven't necessarily caught up to that ideal, what they want.
Yeah.
And so, they absolutely, we won't know if our schools are under enrolled or over. I mean, we kind of know overcapacity in a way, but you could shift programs around to adjust the capacity of that school to better fit the physical space.
So, kind of what you're saying, as long as we're using the same ruler for all the schools, it should be equitable. So if we said, the new schools that were built with different ed specs have the same constraints that older schools do and have the same measuring stick, it should be about the same. We should get the same data as long as we're looking at the same populations. If you have X number of students based on whatever situation, as long as you have that agreed ruler, it should be fine. And what I was remembering when you were talking, Stacy, was that when they were building new schools, and specifically Alice Westfleet, it wasn't necessarily the number of classrooms that was constraining for that site and others. It was where they were located in the building and how much they could put through lunch.
Yeah. And
that is not always a factor for all elementary schools or all programs or whatever. So it's, while I say on the one hand, as long as we use the same rule, it should be fine. Well, a lot of the programs are going to look differently because they don't have
I
that
want to
constraint.
follow up because I don't think it's the same ruler, because I think the ruler is assessing the physical space, and the physical space and the layout is different in each school.
Sure.
So for example, you could have a school that has maybe smaller classrooms, which maybe could work for a pre-K program better than a general, inclusion, multiple teachers program, which means you could have 25 students in a pre-K located there. That's the capacity, but that's based on the physical space. It's not like it's the same
You can't make
yardstick.
the same number of
Right,
students in pre-K and put a fifth grade class in.
Right. So
But
I think it's
you
that
didn't.
the space drives the analysis, not like the number of students who
Like
would
how big the
fit
building
in
is.
there. because it depends on the program. I don't know.
I mean, you could say in a
I don't
sense
know.
that
Maybe you
the
guys know how you're
facilities
gonna do it.
condition report is a ruler that of size and, yeah, go ahead.
So what that pre-CIP report was, proposing was, there's something called design capacity. What was the building designed for? At construction and also with modifications later. But the pre-CIP doesn't spell this out, but we're now calling this program capacity. So the example that they give relates to programs. So different programs use spaces differently. That's what that section of the pre-CIP report tries to explain. But other places do this as well. I know that Fairfax County, for example, does it, and they look at their CI, when they look at their utilization, they look at both ways, design capacity and program capacity. Thing is, program capacity will change year to year depending how the
Right.
programs
Yeah,
are used.
it makes
Right.
no sense to
Because
just,
depending on the many of programs at a school, some programs might have, they dictate that there be smaller number of students, others can be bigger, but depending on the combination of many of programs, the design capacity will be shifting per school year to year.
but the programs should be done across the district. We should say, we want this many programs, and we look at what our capacity is across the whole district. If you do a program capacity study for building, you could play around and get vastly different results. Because the program could be optimized for the physical space, in which case it would be like, oh, look, this has this maximal capacity. It's great. Or if I said, oh my gosh, these little classrooms are terrible for general ed. Wow, we have to double or triple the capacity of this building. That is not a good approach. Do you see where I'm going here?
Yeah,
I mean, we could create all sorts of need for construction that we don't have.
yeah, and I actually would argue, Natalie, you, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You argue and I'll just make one comment.
No, go ahead and make your comment.
Well, my only comment was looking at these numbers. I mean, it just seems like regardless of how you tweak the building or change things or what programs, I mean, we still have, it looks like more space than we need at this point. Is that?
Not everywhere,
necessarily,
and not
because
everywhere.
we're not actually
everywhere,
following
but
the ed specs. No, not even necessarily.
No, okay.
Because I think in a lot of buildings, we are not following the ed specs, and we haven't fully rolled out 80-20 inclusion. And
Mhm.
once that starts.
No,
to
that's a
more-
good point.
So I think it's like, yeah, we can cram kids into the room, but it's below the stated objectives of the school board for education.
Right.
No,
I
I get it.
think what this study would do, this review would do, would be to say, let's go look at all of our schools. Let's not just take the design capacity as design capacity. I mean, the design capacity versus enrollment is telling us that we have 16 or in the next 5 years, like 1,300, or say this year, we have like 1,400 elementary school seats. A surplus of
Extra.
1,400 elementary school seats. And there are some schools, like Robert said, that are at 75% capacity. There are some that are like 115. So it's, it's a mixed bag. But I think when I try to think of, when you have a enrollment projection, when you have a projected surplus of seats, is there an opportunity? What are the opportunities? And I think at this time, because when we were seeing 750 kids enter the school system every year, you just had to put a program wherever it would fit. You put that pre-K,
In the relocatable.
in the relocatable, you put the relocatable out, you put art on a cart, you did it everywhere. But when when we're looking at a design capacity versus enrollment numbers with a surplus of seats, what are the opportunities there? And I think we could go in and especially because we have some schools that are under capacity and some schools that are over capacity, and we have all the information from the facilities assessment, that long range renovation report that says that, okay, well, you know, some of these classrooms are smaller, you know, maybe we put a program in, you know, maybe school A is a better place for program, you know, for this special needs pre-K program, because there's also a space for occupational therapy, and there's also space for, you know, this, and it's not over enrolled. And, you know, you can actually strategically, you know, you can actually strategically place these programs, which can get moved from year to year. And
But it
just
doesn't
so
sound
we're
like-
clear, Robert, when you say programs can be pre-K, it can be, you know, it's a HILT, it's not Spanish immersion
Right.
or.
You're not moving Escuela to.
Right, yeah,
And the report has an example. So
Right.
on page 33, they give an example of like how it's the case study. So like looking at it, like for that particular case example, it's like a capacity of 576. That's what one of the table shows, but then they break it out in that bigger table by programs and number of students enrolled in each of the programs and how many classrooms have those programs. And then they have the authors of that section calculated a design capacity of 545. So that's just to illustrate a kind of more concrete thing.
So the data's been there.
Approach.
So it's just an example.
yeah.
Well, okay, so let's take the example of like, here's a small classroom that can't do well with the general ed, but could do well. I'm just
Sure.
estimating here for like a small pre-K. All right, so, one building has a whole bunch of these small classrooms. Well, if currently there's a bunch of gen ed students in there, the program capacity case study would look at that and go, oh my gosh, this needs to be expanded. This is not, this space is so undersized for what we need. And then over in school B, there's a whole bunch of really large gen ed capable rooms, but that happens to have a pre-K program located there. And then it's like, oh my gosh, this is so undersized. This is under enrolled. I mean, if we are just looking at a snapshot of what programs happen to be at the schools right now, and then building all these case studies around it, school by school basis, then you're gonna get, the obvious thing would be switch the location of the programs, make the pre-K in the small classrooms, make the general ed in the bigger classrooms. Great, we've saved money. But if you don't look at it across the district, you're going to get results that say, we need to spend construction money to expand school A. And by the way, school B, maybe that should be closed, because it's under capacity. And it's a terrible outcome.
Yeah, it would have to be countywide.
But I don't know that it is, because we have a case study that's.
Well, that's just an example.
Is it going to be countywide?
Has to be.
A case
know.
study is just an example.
Right.
It's
And-
something to illustrate a concept. I know that one of my colleagues will start to look at that. We'll look at it for all the.
Right. And this is just proposed. This was proposed in the pre-CIP report. It hasn't been, but I wanted to look at it from a JFAC
Nudge them.
perspective because I will just read again the conclusion. It says schools must be studied individually and periodically to update information APS uses for planning. Calculating total school capacity and accounting for programs in the school would allow for appropriate placement of students, programs, and relocatable classrooms. This cannot be inferred from published building design capacity and utilization rates. I think doing this would give us a
Yeah.
more accurate picture of what our actual capacity is moving forward for planning purposes, for CIPs, for program placement, planning for teacher, for planning factors, for, kind of all of these other things. I mean, and what I was hoping we could do as a JFAC, and I mean, I guess we could do it tonight since we have a quorum, is to make a recommendation to the school board that they do this. I mean, as a, that they proceed, it doesn't have to be anything. We just think like for planning purposes, we think this program, and I think, I think there's information that's available from the, facilities assessment that could also be tied into this examination. It's great.
What do we,
Do it. That'll be our.
what exactly are we proposing?
Um,
To evaluate what?
Just to
to do this study.
suggest that that the school board direct staff to, yes, sir.
Or maybe phrase it into, to lend support to this. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this will, so this is something that is an operation.
Right.
Is starting work on.
Okay.
So it's definitely, there's staff allocated to it.
Okay,
But it's always welcome if,
Okay.
if.
yeah,
if-
we lend support to this review. And I think,
Page 30.
as a, yeah, it's 31 of the pre-CIP report. And to, and I think, in that to kind of use as our joint committee, also kind of do it at the same time, do an examination of what the, if there's community centers in the schools as well, kind of how they are used within the school and those spaces as well.
So there's two ways to go about this. There's looking at the capacity of the way the buildings are currently being used by whatever the program is that happens to be there right now. We could also analyze what the program needs are just by deriving that from our demographics, from like, okay, we know that we have 300 students or 3,000 students across the whole district in a pre-K, and 1,000 in a special needs pre-K. And, and then you just look at what the ed specs are for each of those programs. We know that this is, you build it based on demographics,
Yeah.
not based on facilities. I would almost say that we don't want to support this study in the sense of it being based on the way facilities are currently being used programmatically, because that is the tool that we have to optimize this. It's kind of like building the whole, basis of the structure on the one thing that we can change, we can alter, which is where programs are located.
But there's not a lot of programs at each elementary school, is there? Move around.
So preschools are distributed pretty widely at different elementary schools. So if those moved in
To be
different
clear,
ways.
we're talking about VPK, Montessori, which are, most of them are at MPSA now, I think. Don't quote me on that.
I think they are really.
And they
all
move,
over.
they
They're
all,
really all over.
okay,
And
but
there's-
what other programs are we talking about?
I mean, there's a lot
We
of.
keep
lot
using
of
some
special-
euphemisms,
So
Special ed.
special ed classrooms and
pre-K.
how many, no, in
Because
general.
we said pre-K a lot, and I just
No,
want to make sure we're talking about the entire elementary, middle and high school, or are we talking about just elementary?
No, I think
do
across,
Yeah,
all of
across
it.
the board.
I'm not out to
Yeah.
disagree, I'm just clarifying, that's all.
Yeah.
I think, why don't we
I mean, the
why don't we
ed
take
tech
some time
would
to
give an
review
idea.
this?
Yeah.
And then we can return to it again. I mean, I think it's something that we can support. I'd like to also include that it's also examines the community center spaces and how they're utilized.
Sure.
I think that is in our lane. And I think the reason why is because I think it will give us a more accurate planning number for planning and placement of programs and for, also, kind of a better, give us a more accurate picture of whether, what is the actual surplus of seats that we have, or what is the actual number of seats that we need if we grow again?
So just to clarify, the pre-SIP report, page 31, that whole review, we're saying we should be doing that
And not.
process. Or you're
Yeah.
saying you should
Why not?
review it? Yeah, because it lays out pretty clearly. And when I read it, that says, hey, we've done a lot of due diligence. This is a very complex issue. As Robert said, here's all the ways you can measure it in just one, generic example. But the numbers went, it changed a little, but not statistically significantly using that report. So what are we wanting to have staff /facility/APS do if we don't like that? And that's
Oh, you
what
mean
I'm not
the
sure.
alternative?
Yeah, what is it we're asking for?
So what I would suggest is you map population against ed specs and you map facilities against ed specs, but you don't map current use of facilities.
So ed specs meaning what? But what it could be at that school?
So if you have a room and you could say this room could meet ed spec 1.1, or it could also meet ed spec 1.2. So now we know that we have in our inventory, in terms of ed specs, we have one room that could meet either
Things.
one. I think you have to map them all based on the ed specs. So you look at we will need, this much space based on our demographics. Oh, and by the way, we have these facilities that could meet the following ed specs, but I don't think that's what is being suggested by the pre-CIP report or that case study. And that's what I worry about, because I think what that does is it artificially enshrines what happens to be located at a particular school at this moment in time.
If part of this idea, so I was not part of the staff work on the enrollment management plan, but I know that staff that worked on those short-term strategies to balance enrollment. One of the things that was very apparent to them was programs are not distributed uniformly throughout our schools. Some schools have certain programs, have more numbers of them than others. So I think part of this was to understand from a program capacity perspective, what are the programs that are actually in our schools, and how many students could they possibly enroll? In the enrollment management plan, one of the things that they did is add visuals. For example, they mapped out at the pre-K level some of the programs, and as you can see, not all the schools have the array of programs from Montessori,
Example.
BPI, community peer, special education, for 3 to 5 year olds, for toddlers, for mini MIPA. And so, in terms of thinking about enrollment, and this report is online. You just go to the statistics page at APS, go to the enrollment management plan, look at the report, and then at the end, that on the appendices, you have these visuals of trying to visualize how programs, how they're distributed throughout APS. But, the program capacity goes a step further in terms of looking at all the programs at all elementaries, so that, we understand where things are, where there might be more than others. And it could be a strategy for helping enrollment, balancing enrollment.
Yeah. I mean,
That makes sense.
that's not my understanding of what they're doing, is that they're gonna say, all right, well, Drew has these
and
pre-K,
it's
and
under
that's
or
how it's
over.
always going to be.
Okay, well, as long as
It's-
that's not the way they're gonna
is,
do it.
that Drew has, 4 pre-K sized classrooms, all of them, and 4 pre-K or 4 kindergarten sized classrooms and they all have, they all have sinks and they all have bathrooms and they all meet standard ed specs, you know, or they're all adequate classrooms in the facilities condition assessment report for those programs. And, you know, or, you know, I think that they're gonna look at it and say, this is the actual size, because schools have been used differently since they were built. And I think sort of I think getting a clearer number about what we have and about where the pre-K classrooms go. And I think eventually locating them in the best possible location.
Maybe
The balancing enrollment, but I think,
describe our understanding or our hopes.
Okay.
And then vote on that in the next meeting.
Okay,
That
sure.
kind of thing.
yeah, and you know, read up to the, I mean, really, I just think this is a way of giving us a more accurate number for planning. And the other thing that I would suggest adding was just that the community centers that are part of the school also be examined in terms of spaces and how they're used programmatically. Yeah, and that's sort of where I think JFAC's role is, you know, not, I think, you know, that mini MIPA class needs to go to Nottingham, you know, I
When you
think,
know where the need is, right? Yeah.
yeah, you
Yeah.
know, or just, that is way far out of our lane, but I think in terms of planning purposes, having more accurate numbers, having a more accurate number for the pre-K, having a more, you know, for the enrollment projection.
Yeah, can we go back to that? Did we ever understand? I know where the number came from, but if we know that it's got this huge buffer and it continues to have a buffer of over 100 students beyond any past
Yeah.
capacity filling,
Yeah.
are there the other projections? Aren't they based on that pre-K number? I'm trying to understand if that has a multiplier effect on the rest of the
So,
projections.
so pre-K is not a projection. It's a
I
budget
know pre-K is
allocation.
not a projection, but the projections use it as an input.
No,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So if it's wrong, it doesn't have
It is not.
multiplier
Right,
effects. Okay,
Yeah.
that's better than the
I
other.
was concerned about that two meetings ago.
Yeah. that's what
But
we're trying
when
to-
Robert explained it, I was like, oh, it's just a placeholder
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is eventually worked out and then you have to keep it level for budget planning.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and if any of you are interested in learning more about pre-K, so there was a budget work session number 1, March 19. I had a presentation, but also some of my colleagues in academics, also had questions from the school board at that work session related to pre-K. So I would recommend watching that video and especially watching the question and answer portion of that budget work session number 1. Because, the school board member asked questions similar to some of the ones that JFAC
thanks.
raised.
I mean, I think it is, it's a budgeting question too, and I have heard it come up in budget work sessions, like, 34% increase from this year to next, a 30% increase of pre-K, when you're facing a really tight budget situation is, how do you manage that? And I think the question is not like, the question is, how can that number for planning purposes in the same way of like looking at this proposed school capacity review, is there a way of making that number closer to accurate, closer to what, at least for the next year for planning purposes, while also leaving a buffer, and can it actually be tied to the actual capacity of our schools also. and then also, but also be interchangeable if, for example, we end up, kind of the 25% drop in birth rates from 2019, 2018 to last year, if that starts to come to fruition and we, see a decline in enrollment rather than a flattening, can we add more, can we add a universal pre-K? Can we add, like more pre-K classes in our schools? As a benefit to, if we can afford it, but I'm just sort of asking these questions, like, can that happen? And then the pre-K number then changes, then it gets bigger, or, I just, my question is, like, for planning purposes, for short-term and long-term planning, my concern about, having when we're looking at a flattening of enrollment or a possible decline, and we're seeing such a huge delta between the actual number of pre-Ks and what we're allocating, in our spaces. And maybe that space, maybe after doing this proposed school capacity review, that number is, we have more or we have less. But I think that I just wanted to, I am just advocating for the numbers to be as accurate as possible for planning purposes.
Yeah, and if you, in that budget work session, I highly recommend that everyone watch it March 19th, budget work session #1. And again, a lot of the school board's questions were to the staff related to pre-K. And my sense was that the school board was, requesting staff to look at those numbers. Are there any efficiencies that could be gained to explore that?
And this thing, I'm sorry, to the precinct report on page 32 says, once capacity is adjusted for programs operating different max per students per class, which is exactly what you're suggesting with different programs being in there, it does change in this example by like 35 people. So it seems to me that a lot of these ideas are accounted for.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, we can review it.
Yeah, if there's further study.
I mean, this.
Yeah. I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to put it out there for discussion, for thought. I mean, I think it is relevant to us. And I think in terms of long range planning too, facilities use, I think it's also very relevant.
I'm just aware that because of the movement of the planning department being subsumed into facilities and construction, that to a hammer, everything's a nail.
I was going to ask about that.
Right.
So we have to make sure that this doesn't just head in the direction of,
or get lost in the shuffle.
Is that construction, Robert, that's getting moved?
So you're right. Planning is not part of facilities and operation, but I can tell you, related to the program capacity study, that it is a project that we are working on, or will be working on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we, kind of just support it. I think is what.
Keep supporting the review, yeah, but keep.
Support and add in about the county community center in the schools, and just continue to advocate it, that it be viewed as a countywide and for, long range planning purposes. Okay.
So risk of complicating it one more step. Just aligning the findings, or even trying to kind of base some of them part on the long range motivation report, which at least took a look at something that's Claire is not wouldn't fully satisfy what you were asking about, but at least noted where there are areas where school programs would be ill suited by the space.
Right.
Change this.
So it seems like a good starting point.
Right. And some schools, that might have smaller classrooms might be better suited for a smaller classroom,
Or
like
take the
MIPA
art
with
part and
5
move it.
kids. Yeah,
Or
you know,
That's small.
they're not-
Or
and I think using,
storage space.
right,
and
and
other.
using the information of long-range renovation.
Is there any accounting storage space? Because that got cannibalized completely. But it's a problem to not have any space to store things.
So I don't know if we've looked at that particular question. So that could be something that you,
It also.
Yeah, we may want to.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions about the capacity utilization tables? I'll note again that they're been updated. And,
Well, one point I do want to make about the tables, I didn't want to mention it till we were done with this great discussion. The tables for all option programs assume that they have that from the SIP report that only 50 people enter as a kindergartner when actual enrollment across all option programs are higher than that. And what it does in the outer years is show lower utilization and that they're under capacity because that assumes there's no transfers in, and it assumes that there's no, and that the 50 is sometimes higher or lower than actual numbers. So for option programs, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that if you're looking at the projections in the SIP report, including our capacity utilization table, which that data is based off of, some of it is just take it with a grain of salt. That's all.
so I would not say that it's a uniform number. So
I do know at least 2 option programs that use that.
to the enrollment management plan, one of the things that it mentions, let me see. Let me pull this table up.
Because it's like a footnote in the SIP report. I can find it. I remember seeing it going, that's weird.
So we have a couple of documents that in a way they all interact with each other. And I keep mentioning this enrollment management plan. One of the things that the enrollment management plan is, it called for numbers of entering or allocation for kindergarten at the option schools.
Yeah, that's what-
And so it'll vary. For example, Arlington traditional. I'm projecting it.
Yeah, I apologize. We don't have to dwell on this.
Yeah.
We can come back and talk about it later. I got to keep in the interest, keep them.
Yeah, for example, for that one, Arlington traditional 96. So then that got reflected in some of the what we call the spring update. So the projections for the following school year for budgeting and HR staffing purposes. And so the number will vary depending on the option program. Example. Well, like he is also at 96.
What is it? Because I know at MPSA it's 50 for every year. And I'm trying to find it again. Yeah.
But it'll
But it's
vary.
there's 75 people there this year. So like that, and then it continues in all the further years. So, Escuela Key may have 96 this year and continue on, but it may be less.
You're saying at least NPSA should be adjusted.
It should be adjusted up, and yeah, because it's not accurate.
That kind of,
So I know that the staff will work on this, also talk with the principals at all the different schools.
Interesting. Okay.
that does raise a issue. Have you, has this been discussed, whether there tends to be more transfers in the middle of the year than maybe has historically been the case? Have you noticed that at all? Or, because I'm hearing anecdotally that we're getting a lot more mid-year students added.
From where? I mean, for all of the schools or from where?
Well, probably from,
Right.
maybe outside of the country. I mean,
Well.
Right, but you're talking about, I mean, you're talking across the,
I'm hearing anecdotally, this is not data, but that
No, I
it's,
get
but that like some places are like, oh my God, we need to hire a teacher mid-year, which is not usual.
So in that budget work session from March 19.
I have all-
Well, one of the things that I have to.
I listen.
Oh.
I agree.
So one of the things that I have to do is, in the fall, I make projections for the next 10 years. But then at the beginning of around January, March, I also look at updating the projections for the coming school year, because it's important again for staffing and the resources to the schools. So one of the things I look is at the change mid-year. So from September to the end of January. It was interesting that when I did that look, there were, in that presentation, I called down 5 schools: Abington, Barcroft, Carlin Springs, Hoffman, Boston, and Long Branch. They all have like a growth of K-5 enrollment of 3%, which when I compared September to January previously, it's not something you usually see. And when you do see it, I've learned over time that it's usually an indicator that school, probably needs to, whatever I had projected for it needs to be increased. So you're right, that at least at those 5 elementary schools, there was growth. Pronounced than usual.
Yeah.
And
So
so
maybe we need a buffer a little bit more at some of those schools
Yeah.
in the future.
I mean, some of the school, I remember Oak Ridge being a school where there was a high turnover, there's a high like military,
Right.
family,
Yeah.
kind of State Department, anyway, yeah.
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 Kind of getting down a rabbit hole here.
yeah,
But,
so for these schools, the projections for next school year, that's not reflected in the fall projections, but for that spring update, the enrollment was increased so that they can then be budgeted more staff and resources.
So those transfers are getting captured, is what I hear you saying.
And I wouldn't call it.
But not until the
Growth
next
and
year.
enrollment.
Fair enough. Yeah. Because to your point, State Department people move in and out all year long. Military folks transfer in and out.
Yeah, if it's a transfer in and out, but this is a little bit different. I think that's what.
I agree.
It's just more mid-year than you would expect, which may mean that for the next projection, do you need to build in a little bit more in that projection for those 5 schools?
all right, so the next agenda item we have says discussion on APS and Arlington County government debt service and CIP responses to managing student enrollment and demographic changes. What I hope to do, get the slide deck up, and I put together, but what I hope to do with this discussion is kind of give a little broad overview of CIP, what CIPs do. This is from county, both looking at from the county and from APS. Also kind of taking into consideration, kind of looking at some, at how the county manager has written about some past CIPs, one when we were growing and the last CIP, and how those CIPs responded to, demographic changes or county needs and school needs, because as the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee, we're looking at both. I would also like to just use this discussion as, and then at the end of this slide deck, I added, or close to the end, I added the guiding questions that we used when we looked at the pre-CIP report and the CIP direction.
that last slide? or-
I think it's the third to last slide. That one, yeah, these guiding questions. And this was a screenshot from our November, when we were commenting on the CIP direction. And it says, and I want to use the discussion to, kind of adjust these questions so that when we look at the CIP, right now we don't know. Get the APS CIP next, or the superintendent's proposed CIP next month. And it should be out in time for us to talk about it. And then the counties, we will see have a timeline on there. But anyway, I want us to, kind of use, for consistency's sake, use these same guiding questions. And do we, in this evening, kind of do we want to use these same, do we want to add, are there any questions we want to add? Are there any, especially given the new information we have from the county budget that was just passed, and what we know about the school board's budget and projections? So just kind of, so these are the questions that we had before. Does the CIP create a plan that defines affordable and timely solutions for all priorities? Does it respond to budget parameters? Does it demonstrate an acknowledgement of long-range planning and collaboration between APS and the county? Does it consider each project or proposal in context of other needs, timing, available funding, enrollment projections, and planning for a long-range site and facilities use? Does it establish a process by which trade-offs are transparently considered? And
I can think of two things that are left off of that list that
Okay.
maybe we want to consider.
okay,
One of them, and Steve, want to call your attention to this. I mean, one of them is whether some of these priorities are involved, like environmental sustainability. The county does have the CEP, energy plan, and that could be a consideration the same way that the county priorities on the, prevailing wage issue. It's not a mandate, but if we're gonna start channeling county priorities here and think about how they apply to school
Okay.
plans,
do you want to
that
just
could be something.
add, does it create
How does it fit within the stated community energy plan set forth by the county?
Well, I mean, I think, there is a question that, does it create a plan that defines affordable and timely solutions for all priorities? I mean, maybe there's a way of, I don't want us to define the priorities, especially not in these broad questions.
Mhm.
But I think, there's a way of sort of asking, does it balance define priorities between the two?
It doesn't account for other long-term priorities that can include environmental sustainability, et cetera. So
Right.
the idea is to like look
Maybe we can
beyond.
unpack all priorities
Yeah.
to just give some ideas, because it's not obvious. It wasn't obvious to me
Okay.
as I was looking
Yeah,
at it.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, I should
Let's-
think about that.
Let's go through and just like look through these slides that I put together.
And Steve,
Yeah, but I just want, oh, sorry, Steve, go ahead. You're muted. We can't
Still
hear you.
muted.
Still muted.
Sorry. There you go.
There you go.
Nope.
Oh, we still can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
So try to.
Yeah,
yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Steve, we can't hear you. Let's just go to the first slides and just like give the, so this is from the county website that says,
Steve, you want to try?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay. I'm blaming that on Teams. I don't know why it decided to mute me. Well, first of all, Claire did say she had 2 items and I only heard 1. So I wanted to make sure she got to finish first, but then I did want to jump in.
Go ahead. I don't worry about me. I can take care of myself. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm trying to be, considerate, but thanks. So I agree with Claire's point, of course. I feel like there's a missing element that's sort of long range planning is mentioned, but the term, acknowledge long range planning, it seems like there's a missing component of demonstrating a strategic overview of what I would call the portfolio, for Arlington and APS. There's a bunch of sites, small, medium, and large. And I don't feel that's really reflected in the current guiding stuff. And, not to be a broken record, but I would point to Trade Center as an example where we know the county is looking at Trade Center. It's a huge site. There's a lot going on there. It does involve both the county side and the APS side. And yet there's not a transparent process that I can tell for kind of carrying that forward and looking at the interaction with other locations, such as 601 Carlin Springs and the Quincy site. So I think that's an important missing element that I hope could be brought in, somehow to kind of be able to step back and take that broader look at the whole picture. I hope that makes sense.
Well, okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, so just quickly, the capital plan, CIP is one of the most significant planning processes for Arlington County. It typically identifies the capital needs of the community over a 10-year period. The CIP is a planning document that is updated biannually and subject to change as the needs of the community become more defined and individual projects move along in their respective planning and budgeting processes. The effective use of a CIP process provides for considerable advanced project identification, planning, evaluation, scope definition, design, public discussion, cost estimating, and financial planning. And then there's objectives. This is from the county website, to preserve and improve the infrastructure of Arlington through capital asset, to maximize useful life of capital investments by scheduling major renovations, to identify and examine current and future infrastructure needs and establish priorities, to improve financial planning by comparing needs with resources, estimating future bond issues, and identifying potential fiscal implications. That's from the county. And then the next slide. I think that's helpful in terms of, maybe there's some language in there we can use for our, and then for the county, this is from the superintendent's recommended direction, slide about how the CIP budget works. And it says each CIP typically includes projects that are ready to be included with the school bond and potential projects that the school board wants studied for future consideration. And it said CIPs may change projects if they have more information updated on cost estimates, revenue updates, changes to enrollment, changes to cost of instruction projects. And then, okay, let's go to the next site. And this is from the, and this was just a, a little graphic from the county's 2023-31 CIP, just sort of showing what it invested in schools, utilities, transportation, technology, parks and recreation, public government and facilities. So it's, when we think of, schools and APS share a 10% debt service limit, they want to maintain that in order to maintain a AAA bond rating, so they get the cheapest rate of borrowing.
Right.
So we have to balance the needs of both the county and APS, which is what, JFAC is our role. Next slide, please. This is a message from the county manager. It's very small on my page. Oh, yeah, that would be good. Let's see. So this is from the 2019, actually, yeah, this is from the 2019 CIP message from the, and 2019 was the year that we were opening 3 new schools. You know, we were still, it was pre-pandemic, we were still facing high school enrollment growth and projected, you know, thousands of seats needed, projected. My proposal also assumes for the first 8 years of the 10-year CIP, the same funding commitment we made to Arlington Public Schools 2 years ago. The proposed CIP includes the same amount of bond issuance at the same schedule as included in the school board's last CIP and reflects the continuing impact of funding the 3 new schools under construction scheduled to open in the fall of 2019. In addition, nearly 100 million of a new bond funding is added in years 9 and 10 in the proposed CIP. These funds will allow for the construction of additional facilities to meet the projected growth of our school population. Okay, how do I do this? Slide. And so then this was the one from the message from the county manager from last year. It said, since the adoption of the last 10-year CIP, we have experienced several intense storms that created a major impact on our stormwater management system. Since then, considerable work has been done to help develop the stormwater investment plan to strategically address and mitigate flood risks. As a result, 2 of our primary investment areas for this 10-year plan are climate change and stormwater issues. In addition, we have prioritized the importance of a generational preservation of affordable housing at Barcroft and our commitment to schools' capital plans. These major investments in stormwater, Barcroft, and schools require that we defer some investments to the out years of this CIP. And then he says the fiscal constraints of the last few years, along with the significant weather events and changing environment, have amplified the needs in our community. Crucial but routine capital maintenance, along with our prior out-year CIP commitments, compete with new realities in our community as we grapple with environmental sustainability, resiliency, as well as continuing to meet our commitments in the region. Our capital plan must also address the realities of a post-pandemic world, emerging service demands, including new recreational interests and how and where our workforce gets their work done. In addition to maintaining county assets in a state of good repair, we also look ahead to future investments, whether it's funding studies to optimize existing county sites or planning for future expansion, behind the scenes support for infrastructure, fire stations, libraries, open space, school. The 10-year plan needs to plan for generational growth. So, next slide. Yeah. Thank you. And so this was just the APS CIP funding scenario from last year. And I put this in here because in the superintendent's CIP direction, he said that APS was being, you know, except for the 2 out years, the guidance, you know, the guideline, the sort of guardrails were the $25 million placeholders in the 6 out. From 2026 through FY 2023. And this is the debt ratio forecast from the adopted from the last CIP. And this is sort of a bigger, a close-up of it. And I just bring this to your attention because we're kind of going, I had these in here last, just sort of setting up kind of budget stuff. But these were in here from last month's meeting when the budgets were still being adopted and we were looking at shortfalls and budget, projected budget shortfalls. But I just wanted to point out that the school's debt service here Is this year it's 66.9 million. Next year it's 67.2 million. The year after that, it's 70.2, then 70.256, then 69.02, then 69, 69, 68.7. And if you look at the bottom, the debt service as percentage of expenditures, and that's being held at the $25 million placeholders. Look at every year from this year it's 9.29%. Next year it's 9.49%. Year after that is 9.4, 9.84. Year after that is 9.85, 9.85, 9.85, 9.84, 9.82%. And that's under the 10% debt capacity, shared debt capacity. So we're looking at a pretty tight budget. And this is from the APS budget forecast. This is from the budget book. And it's showing that, these are forecasted budget shortfalls for APS. So this year, this shortfall was, 29.4 million. And it looks like that will likely be closed.
One-time funds.
With a lot of one-time funds. But then next year, and then 2% tax, 2-cent tax increase. But forecast after that, we're looking, so if we close this budget shortfall, next year it's projected to be $30.7 million shortfall. The year after that, if you close that, it's also a 9, and if you close that. So, from a facilities JFAC point of view, I'm just pointing out this debt service and how it impacts the operating budget.
And your county manager, the last paragraph talked about, we don't know where future inflation and interest rates will go. And I think that has a big bearing on the 4+ years from now calculations, which we don't know what's there.
Right, and interest rates have increased. From what I understand, bond, bonds are, they're conservative with the rate that they project. And they usually end up selling them for more. But if interest rates increased higher than what they projected, from what I understand, it was 5%. They assumed it was 5%, but if bonds are selling at higher than 5%, then that debt service is going to have to be adjusted.
And our bonds and interest rates going up and down, that's,
Yeah.
it affects what you can afford. If you think of it like buying a house, the market in 2021, or 23, when this was last debated, was very different landscape. And then what we're seeing now, which I think is putting that upward pressure on our 10% limit, plus quality inflation.
It looks like our county board liaison maybe.
Sign up,
So I just
say
wanted
hi.
to see if there's.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say hi because we didn't have a quorum last time and I happened to be here, so.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Do you have anything to add?
No, just, we do have a budget and capitals starting and I think there's been lots of really good conversations, many of them started by you guys between the two boards. And if you watched our joint budget work session, we basically committed to spend every waking hour with each other over the summer.
Yeah.
So much fun.
Great. Did you do that?
Yeah, exactly. So in 2x2s, but recognizing that long-term path and the alignment with our community, really caring deeply about our schools and especially about our teachers being well compensated, requires some figuring, not all of which got done this year, that we sort of sent sort of signals to each other like this time. So, but I think this summer start to dig in on that quite a lot. And I think even those conservative case that the superintendent presented assumed no COLA in the out years, which is not conservative. So anyway, it, you know, and it often turns out better than it looks when you're standing here. But these next couple of years, we had a couple Hail Mary saves this year on the budget. One, the reason we had all the one-time funding is like a stupid Gatsby federal accounting rule that if you can explain it, then you're no fun at cocktail parties. You know, so that may happen off and on again, but it's pretty unlikely. It has to do with interest rates. The other reason was ironically because we opened new office space, which like leased up right away, but that's not good in the overall macro, you know.
Oh,
so we saw the office space stuff is still declining. Apartments are saving us, but it's tighter and will be tighter for the next couple of years. And there's just some stuff we didn't address as a community yet in terms of the school's budget sustainability, and it was more important that we get the kids vaccinated and back to school and like healthy. But that'll be a lift.
Thank you guys so much. I'm around. And just quickly here, you know, looking at the schools, this is the operating budget, you know, high.
Yeah.
And, you know, 83.8% of the school of the operating fund goes to teacher and wait.
Operate.
This is by fund, not by expense. I put the wrong thing in there, but debt service pays 8% of our, you know, debt there. Out of the budget pie, the biggest piece goes to teacher and staff compensation. The second biggest piece goes to debt service, and it's right currently around 8%.
Not all jurisdictions do it the way we do it.
It's true.
Apparently, other jurisdictions, the debt service is paid by the county,
Yeah.
the county budget, which I just learned recently.
That's why
And
there's more flexibility in teacher pay. Yeah, 8%.
Right, I mean, that's just extra subsidization that it
100%, yeah.
And I don't know if there's a prohibition from doing that, or if it's just a matter of custom and practice that some places ended up paying for the debt service out
I
of
mean,
the
could it be that this,
operating budget.
that APS gets the benefit of the county's bond rating? And so these are county bonds that get issued to cover school obligations?
But across Virginia County, well, I don't know if there's municipalities, school systems can issue debt service, but I know we can't.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
If,
It's interesting.
I wonder if that is a piece of, I mean, it just occurred to me, and this is the first time I've had this thought, if that is a, you know, sort of part of APS's autonomy and part of the reason why APS is sort of not a part of the comprehensive plan.
no,
Or
it's
if
the
that would,
Virginia Constitution that prohibits any input directly from the county onto how the school board pays, how the schools spend their money.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's, and I
Okay.
know this because there's a lot of case law about this back when you have integration issues in Virginia. And the schools were like, you will not integrate us. And
Right.
other communities were like, yes, we will. And the courts and the whole constitution is
Right.
like, you can't tell the schools what to do on their property.
Yeah.
So that it goes deep here in Virginia.
So that's why there's such a split.
It's why the county can hand over the bags of money and then that's it. That's all they can do.
Because I've always wondered, I mean, this is digressing and then we won't, why the healthcare wasn't all wrapped into one big,
Well,
with
and-
the county and with APS to,
Oh.
because I mean, you were
Do you mind the
looking,
bargaining power to, yeah,
well, yeah, you'd
Yeah.
get better services, you'd get cheaper. I mean, it could be a big boon for both. Why you couldn't do that?
Well, I think you could if it wasn't APS managing it. If it's the same way that the county provides nursing staff.
Right.
They're just like, do you want us to have our nurses in your schools? And the schools can say yes or no. They can
Right,
say
so
no.
but you could.
So maybe you could. I
So
don't,
maybe you could wrap it all together and you'd actually get, I mean, because we had that whole healthcare fiasco, but you could have something that would be beneficial for both parties. But I was wondering why you couldn't do it.
I think that the county can't mandate it, but maybe they could offer it as a gift.
Maybe they could, yeah.
I mean, I wonder if it's just, this is the way that it's, that it's always been done. And
I think, yeah.
right, and I
Yeah,
think
you're
that
right.
it is, maybe one of the obstacles towards, real collaborative planning or schools and public facilities being part of the comprehensive plan. I think from, just from an outside perspective, their APS does need some autonomy, and you're saying that it's state mandated. But, then it gets sort of murky, like what is and isn't state mandated if APS is making the decisions about how to spend their share of the 10% debt service, can the why would the county have to pay for their, for their debt service? And,
It's up to the county on what they hand over,
Right.
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean,
the
but
county
We don't work
could
together with.
yeah,
hand over $70 million less and say, hey, here's $70 million in debt service,
yeah,
right? Because the
Yeah.
county could decide.
yeah.
And the schools could say, we'll accept that, or no, we won't,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, I wonder if there's, if there's
There's probably a better way. Well, they're gonna be spending every waking moment together, apparently.
well,
So
I think they're gonna be talking about the operating budget,
Oh, yeah.
because that's a problem.
Mhm.
And, I do think, as we look at both CIPs, we have to be mindful of that, like, every $1 million borrowed is $1 million that you have to pay debt service on at a higher interest rate. And, it has to be just, not saying, we shouldn't spend any, because we do have priorities and we have to spend, we have to spend. But I think it has to, from, my perspective as individual and as a person that sits on this committee, I think that it should, that it should be balanced with all the priorities and, all the, and that we're mindful of long range impacts and long range impacts to our sites, our limited sites, long range impacts to our facilities, how those facilities, especially schools, how facilities impact students and teachers, and how their, utilization is also, class sizes, all of that. And for debt service, if paying more for debt service means, either a bigger budget gap that needs to be closed, or it may mean, that teachers don't get their COLA.
And what makes it, I think, even more tricky is that there are kind of two buckets of financial challenges that are kind of related in the sense that, like, you can only transfer so much between them. So you've got the operating budget deficit projected for next year, and the fiscal years hereafter. So there's only so much you can do with debt in order to take care of that. You can do something, right? Like there are certain capital projects that you can kind of designate as capital, where you can use bond funding, but then you run into the cap. So you've got limited flexibility there. But on the other hand, trying to solve for the, kind of long-term lack of capacity for taking on significant debts, just given our debt service right now, doesn't really help you on the operating front very much, because, it helps a little.
Well, there is one tool that we're not maximizing, which is energy efficiency and cheaper systems like geothermal, which lower the cost of HVAC operations for the next 30 years. That is a tool that actually goes the opposite way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That you, but you have to pay more.
They're very
upfront.
expensive.
Geothermal is particularly expensive to.
So-
public
It-
investment.
I don't know if it's particularly, because it's cost effective within 10 years. So I don't know what particularly expensive is when you offset the cost in 10 years.
So
it runs for 30 or whatever.
So it sounds like the liaisons with the board, like both boards are going to be talking about this, but by way of looking at, say, question 3, when we talk about long range planning, the sort of, piece of that that's on my mind is what can we be doing now to kind of talk about options, especially cost saving options or kind of allocating between operating expense and capital investment. What can we do now to, put us in the best position to have the most possible options when the next budget season and CIP roll around? Like, in other words, if we don't do something right now, are we going to be in a position where we have fewer options if we do face another deficit that we can't cover easily with one-time funds? Such that, well, if we'd only done a little bit more work on the front end and started doing some planning for any number of initiatives, that would be in a better position.
Completely agree. I think it's also the opposite can be true is if we don't invest money now, what's the opportunity cost later that we lose? So we have to look at both sides. I completely agree though.
Yeah.
Is it going to cost more later to do X, Y, Z versus paying for it now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the tricky thing is that, scaling back kind of future kind of big capital outlays doesn't necessarily help you on the operational side.
Right.
In fact, Claire, if you scale back investments that are actually cost saving in the long run, it can hurt you.
Right.
I mean, but that Stacy's point is dropping the debt service, scaling back those big construction projects does help you in the operating budget immediately.
It does, yeah.
Pay less in debt service. But I mean, on top of this, there's the whole aspect of the JLARC study saying that the state is underfunding our schools by 50 million.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so, but we can cut, but theoretically, we're already behind.
Right. But also, whatever budget the state ends up coming up with this year is the budget for the next 2 years from the state. And even if the state gives Arlington more money, we just get such a small a percent, only 13% of our budget comes from the state. So it's something like that.
Yeah, it makes
the rest
sense.
comes from local. But I mean, the JLARC thing, if the JLARC, hopefully it will, gets adopted, or the JLARC recommendations get adopted, they won't be implemented until 2 years from now. So next year, we're looking at that, that shortfall. And the county won't have also the leverage to raise, or I imagine the willingness to raise taxes by another 2 cents next year to close that shortfall. So something has to be done.
So that was my second suggestion, which is addressing the, what is it called? The structural deficit. That was going to be my second suggestion. Do we want to explicitly talk about how does this impact the structural deficit?
What did we decide on your sustainability?
I mean, I think
Yeah, then we had some.
I think we can add something to, does it create a plan that defines affordable and timely solutions for, I definitely think sustainability is a priority.
It is priority.
I don't know. I mean, I would be cautious about adding specific priorities because, I would like to think that these guiding questions can be used over and over again, or be tweaked. We looked at them for the pre-CIP report. We looked at them for the CIP direction and kind of, I think using
To make it
kind of
explicit.
universally.
But I would make the point that it's not like a specific, sustainability is overriding and
Right.
it's critical. I mean, I would agree. I would put it in there because I don't see it changing.
May I propose, and I agree with what you're saying, but what way you framed it initially was that the SIP direction include priorities that the county has already approved, namely sustainability.
Right.
And also the wage part. So it kind of addresses in a bigger umbrella that, you know, isn't specific, like you say, Stacy. But, you know, put something in there that we have a, you know, create a plan that is in alignment with county priorities.
Or identified.
Yeah,
Yeah, identified priorities.
right.
And then it can be,
We're all.
you know, I mean, we can, you know, because we're gonna look at the CIPs separately because they don't come in at the same time. So
They should.
well, they should, but like, you know, for all identified priorities, and there will be a different identified priorities for each.
Sure.
You know, for every year for each CIP, and they, you know, as the slide from the APS said, you know, those priorities change, and you know, the
it just
comments from the
says-
county manager.
If it just says all identified priorities, I would think that that is reference to APS priorities. It would not be obvious to think,
Okay,
there are these other county priorities that don't have any power to be implemented within the schools, but there's, you know, persuasive moral kind of authority behind them.
yeah.
And it's just not obvious that we should also look at those when looking at APS budget or APS CIP.
Yeah, not to be a downer again, but with the first question, I mean, realistically, I don't think we're gonna get a CIP that's provides affordable and timely solutions for all priorities. I think that there are gonna be some priorities that get relegated a bit, if not kind of deferred.
But
And
then that's
so-
not really a good point. I mean, is that if something is a stated priority or an identified priority, but it's not a part of the 10-year, if it's not shown to be affordable on this, you know, on this 10-year CIP, is that creating a plan that creates a timely solution for that priority?
Yeah, well, so what I'm suggesting is that I think a successful plan would be one that identifies its priorities, including in consideration the fact that there might be trade-offs and they might even push out lower priorities, and then at least comes up with solutions for those. And but what I'm thinking about here is the many needs that were identified in the long-range renovations report. I mean, if we kind of upgraded every HVAC system that's nearing end of life, if we renovated or rebuilt every building
Right.
that has, you know, shown to be like not very well suited for its current instructional programs, I mean, we can't afford that in CIP. Like, you know, that's sure before we even get to other capital projects that we'll also kind of need to do. So,
Right, but you know, it was identified in the last CIP to do a major renovation project. And it was identified as a priority, or I don't know if it was actually identified as a priority in the pre-CIP report. It was just to do the set or in the direction for identified. But, you know, if there's no money to do a even one major renovation project of a school, of any school, then I would say that that's not creating a timely, you know, it's not a solution that defines affordable and timely solutions.
Yeah.
I think just adding the word identified priorities is probably a good one,
Yeah, sure.
because it's, you know, it's not up to us to, you know,
Pick which ones.
yeah, yeah, but, you know, and the county will identify priorities.
Right.
That we don't really, you know, that changed from 2019 to 2023, and it will potentially change from here too, you know, well, they need a new fire station, you know, is there a solution in there? And I mean, the county CIP last time was tight. I mean, because they had deferred so many projects for giving APS so much debt service, and then through not doing CIPs, they really packed that to really tight, like 10, you know, up to the limit debt service. And so for them, you know, and I'm not sure, and all of those projects in their last CIP had, you know, research and funding, you know, this is what, you know, Claire and what the pre-CIP report said that they, you know, APS wants to do, you know, more detailed, you know, all of those, you know, all of the APS or all of the county CIP projects were researched and identified with, you know,
Yeah.
financial and plans, and, you know, they had maxed it out. So any, you know, if the county needs something else or APS needs something else and there's no more money, you know, not much more money coming in, the county's going to have to make some trade-off decisions.
Right.
Yeah. So
I'll just say this. I agree with everything you just said. I just think going back to what Claire was saying, I do think sustainability is really critical, period. It's not just a priority, it's something we have to do.
right.
And that it needs to be, and it would be great for this group to actually, for us to put that in here somewhere. Say that is something that's not, I mean, I get it, you can't pay for things, but it's something that we have to do, especially when you talk about facilities.
Yeah.
Buildings, you're talking about, you know. I mean, I just think it's a really important thing that we try to integrate, that's all.
Yeah. I mean, I
don't know. I agree.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we have to, I think it has to,
So we can weave it in somehow.
yeah.
That it comes, you know, it's important to say that, and it's, you know.
It's also something that, I mean, I think it's also, something that we can point out, something that I've considered is that, you know, the county has identified some like building sustainability goals, like green, you know,
Lead certification, stuff like that.
yeah, or, you know,
Think about
net
carbon
zero
buildings,
by,
yeah, all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Well, that's the community energy plan. And so
Right.
those goals are for, some of them are for county operations.
Yeah.
And some of them are for the community at large, which of course they don't have control. The county cannot mandate whether a gas vehicle drives through
right,
Arlington on its way to the city or not, right?
right,
But they are trying to use that moral suasion and spend money and design things certain ways
Right.
to foster that. So yes, that is what the community
Yeah.
energy plan, some
Yeah.
of what it does.
Yeah.
And the green building incentive program is probably thinking of, but that's very developer specific. But the county could offer money to APS, again, of like, here, do you want some nurses? Hey, do you want a geothermal system? You know, the county can do that.
You know, maybe we add the sustainability in the consider each project proposal. in the
Yeah,
context
second
of other
last.
needs.
I know.
Yeah. Facility use and energy sustainability goals.
Yeah,
Well, and I think I like the way you described it as well, where it's some investment, but long-term, like cost paths, or since we're
Right.
joint facilities, it could be something where you're looking at it. Are there things that we can bring to those facilities that might be revenue generating even? So it
Yeah.
might be small amounts and, you know, just looking at that balance. So it's cost savings, and revenue generation. Some of the schools, more in the joint facilities.
I'm with you.
All right, I should probably call, does anybody have any public comment?
Now the caller who hasn't identified themselves.
Okay. Okay, well, I will, is anybody else to add?
After the meeting over.
Okay. Okay, all right, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking time to come and next. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, next week's important, please plan to come. We'll be giving feedback on the CIP if we don't have a quorum